Welcome to the HTML5 project training series. I'm Mike King, your host, and this is our CSS3 Transforms projects. And this is part 5 of the 2D 3D transforms in CSS3. And in this tutorial, we begin to put it all together by building a card flip application that takes the new properties of CSS3 that we've been looking at for the past few tutorials and puts them into an HTML5 application. And I'm just calling it a card flip application. But this is going to be the first of many applications that we're going to build using these brand new transforms that we have available in CSS3. So let's move into our development environment and dig into actually starting to build this code. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and drop out of our presentation, drop into our development environment. Let's go ahead and confirm we have our Apache server up and running, which we do. Very good. I'm going to bring up Google Chrome, which will be the browser that I'll be using for this demonstration. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up, let's go ahead and refresh that screen. Go ahead and bring up Sublime Text 2, which will be my text editor. You'll notice I've already got my HTML start file loaded for my card flip project. This is actually going to be a pretty intense project. There's a lot of different things we're going to do in this. It's probably going to take a little while to get through it all because there's quite a bit of code in it. So in part 5 of this tutorial series, we will continue on our journey of the CSS3 Transform Properties and build a card flip application. This allows the user to display additional information in the same amount of space as you can display information on the back and the front of cards inside your HTML documents. There are many ways that we can use this type of presentation in our documents, and we'll discuss them as we actually work through these exercises, because there's a lot of different ways that you can actually use this in an application. I mean, this is pretty cool. Anything that you can do on these divs, you can actually put into the HTML, you could actually have displayed on these cards. And you'll see some demonstrations of that as we go through this. So let's demonstrate what we're going to be doing before we actually produce this video. And what I want to do is let me go ahead and load up because I actually have 2 finished projects here. So I'm actually going to load up example number 4, which is one of my finished projects. And I'm actually going to load that up in my browser, example number 4. And in this tutorial, actually what we're going to do, and actually what I want is example 3. When we hover over the card, it actually flips it for us. So you notice as I hover over a card, it actually brings the back, and you'll notice that the text on the front and the back is different on these individual cards. So as we hover over them using that pseudo effect, we actually change the card. And then what I want to do is I want to take it one step further. I actually went one step further, and in example number 5, what I've done is I've actually written a little bit of JavaScript, and we've got some listeners on our div, our div elements, and when you click on the card, it actually flips it over. And again, same concept. We have different information on the back of the card than we do on the front, but now it actually takes a mouse click to click it over, and it stays there until you click on it again. Because I thought this one would actually be a little bit more handy depending upon what you were trying to build with your sites. And again, we're using these 3-dimensional transform elements. You notice that we actually have that 3-dimensional. It actually looks like the card is spinning on a center axis when we click the mouse. And that's what we're going to build. We're actually going to build both of these inside this tutorial. So let's get started. Okay, so we're now back with our start file. There's nothing actually displayed yet because we haven't put anything in it. So the first thing I want to do is let's go ahead and add some HTML5 to our actual card flip project. I want to go do a save as. Let's go ahead and save this as example1, example_1. .html. So you'll have, if you have access to the exercise files, you'll have all of these files available. Let's go ahead and load that file up. And so the first thing I want to do is let's go ahead and add our heading. In this demonstration, we'll be embedding our CS as we've done in the previous exercises inside of our HTML document. So I'm going to keep the CSS in the head section of the document. Please understand that's not normally how I would do that. I'm just doing that for simplicity's sake so that you can actually see things as we're putting it in and we don't have to jump back and forth between different documents. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and put my H2 heading in. So I'm going to come right down to my body section, and I'm going to add H2 heading, our card flip tutorial. And then I'm going to add some individual sections to our page. And I want you to understand, you can add as many of these as you want. For the demonstration, I am going to have 4. You'll notice I've started a section. I've given it a class of cards, and then inside that section, I actually have 2 divs. I got one div on top with a class of back, and then I've got card 1. This is the back of the card. You notice I've got those in strong tags, back. And then right below that div, I've got another div with a class of front. And again, card 1, this is the front of the card. So both of those are card 1. One is the back, one is the front. And you'll notice they're both enclosed inside of a section that has a class of cards. And that becomes important as we start setting up our styling. So let me go ahead and put this in. I'm going to have 4 of these for our demonstration. So let me go ahead and get those in place. And then I'm going to go ahead and pause. Let me take out these lines so it's easier for you to see everything. I'm going to leave the space between the heading. Now keep in mind I've got 4 of these section elements. Each section element has 2 divs. I'm going to go ahead and scroll up. And then good time to pause if you want to go ahead and type all that in if you do not have access to the exercise files. Then what I'm going to do is go ahead and refresh our browser window. Come in here, open up example 1. Oops, once we save everything, let's go ahead and refresh our browser window. And you can see now what that all looks like before we start doing any of our styling. You'll see I've got a card 1 back, card 1 front, card 2 back, card 2 front, card 3 back, card 3 front, and so on down the line. You can have as many cards as you like. Just remember that you'll want to change the inner HTML to reflect the correct card numbers for your cards so they're unique text as they're flipped. And what I mean by the inner HTML, in case you've never heard me refer to it like that, that's this information that's between the div tags, the div elements. That's my inner HTML for those div elements. And each card is unique in that it has its own card number. Now the text is the same, but each card has its own unique card number. If you're going to add additional cards, you want to make certain that you make sure that your text or your inner HTML text is unique. Keep in mind that you can have any valid HTML on the inside of your card divs as you like. As long as it's valid HTML, you can put anything you want inside these div tags. And that gives you an idea of some of the things you could do with these. I mean, you could have a photograph on one side and a description on the other. So that someone could be looking at a photo album that you had, you could click on the photo and on the back you could have all the information about that photograph. And you could have hundreds of these. I mean, this is a pretty cool interface if you think about it, once you start thinking about how you could use it. So now we can start to add some CSS to make our cards look a little bit more like a card set. So we'll set up our cards so that the back and the fronts will start at different degrees of rotation. You should remember that rotation property from our earlier exercise. By having one start at 0 degrees and the other start at 180 degrees, we're treating them as they're 2 different entities facing in different directions. And that's how we're going to start set this up as we start working through this. So the first thing to do, let's go ahead and add some styles to our actual cards class, which is the class that identifies all of our sections. I'm going to go ahead and grab some code, and inside my style tags at the top, I'm going to go ahead and put in some styling for the cards class itself. I'm going to give them a width, a height, a margin, and I'm going to tell all of them that I want them to float left. So keep in mind now what we're doing is we're actually formatting this cards class, and each one of our sections is assigned to that class. Let's go ahead and save those changes. Let's go ahead and refresh our browser window, and you'll notice now that you're already seeing that they're starting to break apart. Good time to pause if you want to go ahead and copy that and type that into your text editor. You can size them any size that you like based on what you're looking to achieve with your formatting. I'm just going to keep mine at 200 by 160, and you'll see as we get into this why I've chosen that. But I mean, that's a good, for our demonstration, that's a good size for the demonstration. And the margin I set is just to allow space between each card. So this margin that I have right here, in case you're wondering why I did that, that actually gives us a little bit of space between the cards. And you'll see when we get the backgrounds in there, why that becomes important. All right, so the next thing we want to do, now we want to target all of our cards again, but this time we're going to be targeting all the cards class with the child class of front. So we're actually going to be looking to target the front of the cards. So now we're going to be looking at this cards class again, but this time we're also going to be looking for the class of front. So we're going to be targeting both. And I'm going to go ahead and set this up right below where I set up my card class. And again, we're getting very specific now with my selectors. I'm targeting a class of cards that has a direct child element of a class of front. Again, getting very, very specific with my selectors. I'm going to talk through this as I go through it. So let's go ahead and just put this in place right now, and then we'll talk through it all as I get it in place and get it set up and formatted. So we're setting up our fronts. And let me just get my formatting straight. Let me go ahead and save these changes. Do a save as. I want to save this as example 2. So what I've done is I've targeted my classic cards with the direct child to front. I've set my position as absolute. Setting the position as absolute keeps them positioned correctly in the containing element. Remember, these are actually in my front class is inside my cards class, which was part of the section. So that properly positions them inside that section. This also allows the cards to stack on top of one another, positioning them in the absolute same location. So when I get my backs and fronts together, they'll be exactly in the same spot. Next, we set up the transform properties we have studied in our earlier tutorials, and we'll be setting the perspective function and the rotate Y property because it's a single element. We'll be doing that both at the same time, and we just covered that in the previous tutorial. Why we can do that with a single element, but it's not a good idea to do it with multiple elements. We'll be doing it with our single elements here. We're setting the perspective at 800 so as to give it a good 3D perspective. A setting too low will make the card appear warped. And again, a setting too high just makes it look funny. 800 is a really good setting for these cards. You can experiment with your settings and find one that's good for your interface. Next, we use the back face visibility property, and that's one we don't use very often. You notice I'm going to skip right through the background. Everybody should know what the background is, what the width is. We're actually setting up the width to match our width for the card itself. The height matches the card itself. My border radius, I'm just going to give them around the corner because it'll make it look more like a playing card. And then the back face visibility we haven't seen a lot before, but the back face visibility property, something new to CSS3, is so that you cannot see the back side of the cards as they're rotating. In other words, we don't want to see that text as the card's flipping until it's physically flipped, till it's done. So we actually make that hidden. This keeps the back text from being visible until after the card is fully rotated. Next, we set the transition property to transition the flip of the card, and that's what we're doing right here. This is actually setting up the transitioning of the flip of the card. By the way, this padding is just giving us a little padding with the text that we have on the cards around them so they're not sitting right there on the edge. But this transition is actually what controls how that flip is transitioning as the card is flipped itself. We're telling it to transform, half a second, linear, and there's no delay state. So this is transform. Again, it's going to take half a second. It's a linear transformation. We'd have this ease out, ease in, linear. I tend to use linear a lot because it looks nice and clean. And this is a delay state if we wanted to delay, which we don't, so I've got that set to 0. Now we're going to basically do the same thing for the back of our cards. So let me go ahead and scroll up. Great time to pause if you want to go ahead and type that in. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab this because basically we're going to format the back the same way that we formatted the front. I'm going to come down right below where our closing bracket is. I'm going to paste this in. I'm going to change my dot front to dot back because there's a couple things we have to update here because now we're actually going after the back. The absolute stays the same. Now when it comes down to transform perspective, you'll notice here I had 0 degrees. Well, obviously if this is the back of my card, this has to be 180 degrees. Because it's full circle, 360 degrees. If this is the front, then 180 would be the back. I want to change my background color here to 9CF because I want to use a different background color when we flip the card over. Again, the width is 200 pixels, 160 pixels for the height. Border radius obviously is going to be the same. Back face is going to be the same. My padding is going to be the same, and my transform is going to be the same. So the 3 key things you want to make certain that you changed here is you want to change the class to back, because remember now we're looking at the back of the cards where we have that back class. You want to change the class to back. You want to change your 0 degrees to 180 degrees. You want to change your color. I'm going to go ahead and save all those changes. Great time to pause if you want to go ahead and type that in. Again, don't forget, we want to change the rotation. There's one other change that's important in that rotation to 180 degrees. This way, when the user interacts with the element, it is already flipped in the other direction since it's back. The settings here are just as they were in the front with the exception of the two changes that we made. Again, don't forget, we want to make the change for the 180 degrees, we want to change back, and we want to change the color. So now we're going to look at how we transition the cards from front to back. And that's going to be the next thing we do. We're actually going to start looking at how these cards transition inside of our document. All right, I want to go back. Let's go ahead and refresh and let's go ahead and load up example 2 where we just made our changes. And you can see all the changes that we actually have inside there now. Now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and save this as example 3. Do a save as example_3. Because now we're going to look at how we're actually going to set this up to transition these cards. So the first thing I want to do is inside my styling, because in order to transition these, what I need to do is I actually have to get and transition a pseudo element. And I'm sure if you're familiar with CSS, you know what pseudo elements are. I'm going to target the cards class, and I want to go to the pseudo hover for that cards class. And the first one we're going to look at is the front. So I'm looking at the pseudo element for hover for cards that has a child element of front. I'm going to come down here and close that curly brace. And what I want to do is I want to perform a transform. So I'm actually going to come in here and I'm going to say transform perspective 800, rotate Y 180 degrees. So what I'm actually doing is I'm performing the transform and rotating that card 180 degrees. So now whenever someone hovers over the front of the card, it will make the following new rule occur. And that's going to be this new transform rule. Let's go ahead and save that change. Make sure we're on example_3. Let's go ahead and save our changes. Not going to see anything take effect yet, and I'll explain why in a minute. But now I also want to go ahead and do the back. So I'm basically going to copy the same rule, and I'm going to come down right below here, and I'm going to paste this rule in place. But now what I need to do is I need to, just like we had done in the past, I want to change this to back, and I want to change this to 0. So 0 degrees. And I want to save all the changes, refresh our browser window, and you'll notice nothing's working. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute. Went through all this and none of this is working. Why? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is a lot of the browsers don't quite support all these transform properties yet. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to put in some fallback coding for some of our browsers, some of the browsers that we're using. And what I want to do is I'm just going to go ahead and grab my WebKit fallback coding. And I'm going to put that on our front. We always want the transform, by the way, to be the last one. So I'm going to get the WebKit for that. And I'm going to get the WebKit for the back. Let's go ahead and save both of those. Save our changes. Refresh our browser window. And we're still not there, so we're going to have to go make a couple changes for our transitions. Good time to pause if you want to type in that WebKit transform perspective. And by the way, all you have to do, you could actually copy this line, paste it up top, and then just put the dash WebKit dash transform in front of it for both of those, because you're going to need them. And actually what I want to do is, well, as long as we're here, let's go ahead and grab the ones for the Microsoft rendering engine and for the Opera rendering engine. So I'm going to go ahead and grab those, because when I'm building these, I tend to put those in place anyway. And again, it gives me fallback code for all the older browsers, and it makes me pretty compatible with everything that's out there now. And this way we don't have to play around with it. That's why you didn't see me doing a lot of testing here, because I knew that we were going to have to do this. It's pretty standard. It probably will be for a little while until all the rendering engines catch up with all the new stuff. So saving all our changes, refreshing our browser window, and we're going to do the same thing now with a couple of our other ones up top, because we actually have to do some transition stuff at the top too, where I have my cards in back. Right here for cards back where I've got the transition. Again, because we're doing the web rendering different engines, we're doing the WebKit, Microsoft, and Opera. I'm going to save those changes. That's for the back. Good time to pause if you want to type those in. Again, I've got WebKit, Microsoft, and Opera are the ones that I'm using. Haven't put Mozilla in because I don't really think that we're going to need Mozilla. We're going to need one other set up top, and that's right here where we do the transform. Same thing. And again, like I said, you could actually copy the line that's there and then just add WebKit, Microsoft, Opera. Good time to pause if you need to type that in. And then we need to go back and do the same thing for our front cards, and then we're good. So I'm just going to scroll up a little bit farther when we get the transition for the tops. I'm going to come right here. And we could have done these when we were actually entering all the code. I just thought it would be easier for you to see what was there, what we need at a bare minimum, and then put the web rendering kits in after that was complete. So we've got WebKit, Microsoft Opera, and this is for the front of the card now for the transition transform. And we're going to do the same thing at the top, just like we did with the back. I'm going to come up Transform Perspective and do the same thing there. WebKit, Microsoft Opera, and again, everything's the same except we're putting the rendering engine just prior to the transform for each of the different engines that are available out there. So we're going to go ahead and save all those changes. Good time to pause if you need to type in the front. Let me go ahead and scroll down to make sure you got everything for the back. Good time to pause if you need to. And then let me scroll down a little farther, make sure you got everything for the front and back hovers. I'm going to go ahead and save all our changes. Refresh my browser window, and now we should have working engines for all of our cards. And you can see that we're testing now. We're good in Opera. Let's go ahead and bring up Internet Explorer. Good for Internet Explorer. Let's go ahead and bring up Google Chrome. We're good for Google Chrome. And that's good. So we are now, everything seems to be working good. We've got all of our stuff in. So again, let's go over a couple things that we talked about here. Setting the position of absolute keeps them positioned correctly in the containing element. In this case, the cards class is the containing element. This also allows the cards to stack on top of one another, positioning them in the absolute same location. So when it's flipping between the front and the back, it's important that we have that absolute there because, again, it positions them in the exact same location. Next, we set the transformation property. And again, very important property that we've done there. It's very important how we've set this up. So now whenever someone hovers over the front of the cards, it will make the following new rules occur. So whenever someone hovers over here, it's actually running these rules now with our pseudo hover. So it's actually changing the perspective to 800 and rotating them 180 degrees if it's on the front. If it's on the back, it's changing the perspective to 800, which, by the way, was set to 800 to begin with. We actually didn't really change it, but it's actually rotating it back to 0. So if I'm on the front, it's rotating it to the back. And when I come out, if it's on the back, it rotates it to the front. So it brings it right out as we leave it. So what's really cool, it's a very cool effect. Gives us a lot of interesting things that we can do with these, but I think there's something that's even better. So if I was going to use a phone or a tablet, remember we don't have a hover effect on phones or tablets. That's not there because they're all touchscreens. It doesn't exist. So what we can do is we can actually use some JavaScript to monitor for a click event instead of a hover event. And we can actually have these triggered from a click, and then they're actually going to stay there until they're clicked on again. And that's what I want to do in the next portion of this exercise. I want to go ahead and show you how we can change this code to support a click event and running a function in JavaScript to actually change the way the card is being displayed inside the browser window. And that's what we'll do in the next part of the tutorial. So in this part of the tutorial, we're going to add some additional functionality to our little application here. Because what I want to do is I actually want to make it trigger off a click instead of just a hover, because like we talked about earlier, there are some devices that don't have the hover feature available. So the first thing I want to do, let's go ahead and do a save as. Let's save this as example_4.html. And again, so you'll have all these if you have access to the exercise files. So in this section, we'll add some additional functionality to our card flip application. We're going to add a small JavaScript application that will allow us to trigger our CSS3 animations where we do not need to depend on the pseudo class of CSS3 to actually trigger that. So the first thing we'll want to add is our existing page is a couple of script tags in the head section of our document. So I want to come up below my style tags. Let's go ahead and pull some of this out. And I want to add a couple script tags, because I'm actually going to have to write a JavaScript that's going to reside in these tags. It's actually going to give us the functionality, the function that we need for this to work. And I want to make sure we save this as example_4. That's good, we did. So before we start that, let's go ahead and remove the hover effects from our previous example. So I'm going to come inside my document. I'm going to get rid of this hover because we don't need these anymore. We're going to go and save this change. I'm going to go back and refresh the browser window, load up number 4. I should have my cards now, but I don't have any hover effects because we've actually pulled those out of the document, which is good. We don't need those anymore. Since we're changing this to a click trigger, we'll no longer need those effects. We did add our script tag, so right below our script tag, let's go ahead and add an opening and closing script. And now we're going to build a function inside JavaScript, and I'm not certain if you're familiar with JavaScript, but you're going to get a little familiar with it here. That's actually going to do a lot of these transitions for us inside JavaScript. So I'm going to create a function. My function is going to be called flipCard. And in the flipCard function, I'm actually going to pass in 2 variables. I'm going to have an element variable, and I'm going to have a boolean. And my boolean is going to basically store true or false. So I'm going to have my opening curly brace and my closing curly brace. And let's come down a couple lines, and I'm going to say if my boolean variable is equal to true. So this is a standard if statement. And it's looking at this value that I'm going to pass in. It says, if it equals to true, I want you to do the following. And now I'm going to have a whole bunch of code in here. I don't want you to have to watch me type all this, so I'm just going to copy this and paste it so you can see it. And we'll talk about it as I put it in. It's taking my element variable based on what I'm passing in right here, because you're going to find out that's actually going to be where we're located in the document. And it's saying .children1.style transition, and it's going to set up our transition, and then it's going to set up my transform. And again, this is for my 1s and my 0s. It's for my fronts and my backs. And then I'm going to come down right here, and I'm going to put in another if statement. So if this value is true, what I pass in here, it's going to perform these, and you're going to see in a minute why I did this true and false, because I'm actually going to assign a true and false value to front or back, depending upon where we're at inside our application. And then I'm going to come down and I'm going to put in another true or false value right below this one. And I said, if it's false, it's going to perform this code. So we've got our function complete. That's all we actually really need to do right now. But you'll notice it's not making any impact. I'm loading up example number 4 and I can't do anything, and that's because we don't have anything yet that's listening for that event. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to go put an on-click attribute. Most people, there's a lot of people don't even know you can do this, but you can actually put attributes on any one of our elements inside of HTML. So I'm actually going to add an on-click attribute, and the first one we're going to add is to my back. So I'm going to go to each one of my classes that have back, and I'm just going to paste this in place. And I realize I did not pause at the top. I'll be there in 1 second. We'll go back. But I want to do it every back, and I want to put on-click equal flipCard, so it's calling that function that we just created. It's calling the function saying this dot parent node, so it's saying where are you at? Because that's what it's actually doing here. It's actually picking up, it's inside my cards, and it's passing cards and faults to that back. So it's saying you got a class of back, I'm going to pass in that and faults, and then you're going to perform that function. So we know if we perform the false one, we're performing this portion of the function. And if we perform the true one, we're performing the front portion of the function. So let's go put all our backs in place first. And I'm just going to paste these in. I should have 4 backs, so I should have this pasted in 4 times. I'm just going to put a space for clarity. Let me go ahead and scroll up real quick. Right here is where you can actually type one of those on-click events if you want to go ahead and copy it. Good time to pause and paste that with every class of back. Then I'm going to go ahead and scroll up because I forgot to pause where we did our function inside our script elements, instead of our script tags. Let's go ahead and pull out those spaces, and now would be a great time to pause if you need to go ahead and type in. Let me actually expand this so we don't have any broken lines. Makes it a little bit easier for you to read. Good time to pause if you want to go ahead and type in the information inside of our function for our flip card function in the script tags. And while you're doing that, I'm going to clean up some of these down here because this will make it easier for you to see these also. And now you can see that flip card on the back, a little bit easier to read now that I've actually expanded our window. If you want to go ahead and get those in place, good time to pause. And now I'm going to go ahead and grab the code for the front of the cards. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add a space, add that on click to the front of our cards, make sure we've got our quotation marks closed out, or that would be a mess. Because I lost my parentheses and my semicolon and my quotation mark. There we go. That would have been a true mess. Go ahead and copy that, and that's got to go on each one of the fronts of our cards. Good time to pause if you need to go ahead and type those in. I'm going to go ahead and save all these changes. I'm going to go and not minimize, but shrink my text editor down a little bit, because now we actually should have this now working, where when we click on it, our item flips from front to back. So you've actually seen how we can actually use now an event inside of an element in HTML to trigger a JavaScript function, because that's exactly what we've done here. And there are a bunch of elements, a bunch of different triggers that we can use inside JavaScript, inside our HTML documents. OnClick is just one of many. I mean, we have mouse over, mouse out, OnClick, roll over, roll out. I mean, there's just oodles and oodles of events that occur as our mouse is passing over our browser window. Every one of those events could trigger a function inside of JavaScript. I don't know if you've taken any of the JavaScript classes yet on the site. If you haven't, I would recommend, starting to pick up some JavaScript. JavaScript's a very, very cool language. It gives you a lot of abilities inside of your HTML documents, a lot of interactive abilities inside HTML. And I am actually working on a full-blown JavaScript class that's going to teach JavaScript start to finish, kind of like the thing we did with HTML, the 26-hour course on HTML. It's going to take JavaScript and just walk you through step by step, teaching you all the different aspects of JavaScript. But this is a cool little application now. You've got a nice little application. We learned how to do the hover over using a pseudo element, and we just looked at how we can actually use a JavaScript element, and now we've got this triggered using a click, a mouse event click on our items, on our cards. One thing that's been driving me absolutely crazy for the last few minutes, I've noticed we've lost our padding here. My semicolon disappeared from my padding settings for both the front and the back of those cards. Go ahead and save that. Make sure your semicolons are there, because that was just kind of weird. I just noticed that, holy mackerel, my padding's gone. And for some reason that the semicolon was gone from that, which could explain why I had to put in all the different transitions to make everything work. Who knows? You gotta love coding, semicolons. But anyway, that's gonna be the end of this tutorial for this particular set. We're gonna move on and continue to keep building these 3D applications now that you've got a good handle on how these transforms work in CSS3. And I think the next one we're gonna start working on is a cube, like a dice, inside of CSS3. And using that effect, or maybe a carousel. I don't know. I'll see you in the next tutorial.